Be me, Emmett, 35. Senior engineer at a respectable mid-tier tech outfit. Let's label it Innovatech Solutions for convenience. I'm not chasing fame, and I'm not coasting either. I'm dependable. The kind of dev who untangles the messy problems and leaves the codebase cleaner than he found it. Been around long enough to remember 3 major restructures and at least 5 new mission statements. Outside of work, life runs on autopilot. Lift weights, boot up a game, drop by a place on Sundays. My ambitions are modest. Steady projects, reasonable pay, minimal drama. The team's a balanced mix of fresh grads and battle-tested lifers. Arthur's one of the constants. Early 50s, project manager, practically part of the company's foundation. He started back when connecting to the internet made noise. If there's a chapter in this company's history, he lived through it. Cynical as hell, but fair. If you do good work, Arthur's got your back. If you slack off, he'll let you know. We also have Flynn, a kid in his early 20s, junior analyst, a little nervous, always trying to prove himself. Good kid, just needs experience. For years, things were fine. It was a meritocracy. You were judged on the quality of your work. If a project succeeded, the team got bonuses. If it failed, we all looked at what went wrong. Simple. Then, a few months back, the company hired a new HR executive. Her name was Eleonora. We all got the company-wide email with her picture and bio. Looked like she was fresh out of some expensive school, mid-30s maybe. The bio was a word salad of corporate buzzwords: synergizing human capital, fostering inclusive paradigms, driving equitable outcomes. I didn't think much of it. HR is HR. They live in their own world of acronyms and mandatory fun days. My first real encounter with her was at the next all-hands meeting. She gets up on stage after the CEO gives the boring quarterly numbers. She's got this intense, almost evangelical look in her eyes. Starts talking about her vision for the company. Not about profit or innovation or product. It was all about social change. She said Innovatech had a moral imperative to deconstruct the systemic biases inherent in the tech industry. I look over at Arthur. He's staring at the ceiling like he's praying for a meteor to strike the building. Eleonora goes on about how the company isn't diverse enough, how there's an overrepresentation of certain demographics in leadership and technical roles. She never says too many men, but everyone knew what she meant. The air in the auditorium got real thick. A few women in the marketing department were nodding enthusiastically. Most of the engineers, me included, just sat there trying to figure out if this would mean more paperwork. The first change was small: mandatory workshops. An email went out. Unconscious bias training, attendance required. We all had to file into a conference room for a 4-hour session. Some consultant stood at the front with a PowerPoint. It was exactly what you'd expect. We were told that as men in tech, we were swimming in a sea of privilege we couldn't even see. That our very presence could be a microaggression to others. We had to do these awkward role-playing exercises. Flynn got picked to act out a scenario where he talks over a female colleague in a meeting. The kid was so flustered he could barely speak. The consultant kept saying things like, "Notice the impulse to dominate the conversation. That's the patriarchy at work." I just sat in the back, silent. Arthur was next to me, doodling on his notepad. I glanced over. He was drawing a perfect schematic of a trebuchet. After the workshop, things started to feel different. Eleanor's HR department expanded. They hired a director of equity and belonging. New posters went up in the hallways, stock photos of diverse groups smiling with slogans like, "Equity is our strength." Emails started coming out with reminders about using inclusive language. You couldn't say guys anymore if a woman was present. It had to be folks or team. It was all minor stuff, but it was constant, a low-level hum of ideological pressure. Then the rumors of restructuring started. The company had missed its quarterly targets. Wall Street wasn't happy. The C-suite announced that they needed to trim the fat. Layoffs were coming. A feeling of dread settled over the office. Everyone was on edge. Who would get the axe? Normally, it was based on performance. Low performers and people on failing projects would be the first to go. But Eleonora was in charge of the process. She sent out a memo explaining that the layoffs would be handled through an equitable lens. It said the company would use this as an opportunity to rebalance the workforce and correct historical disparities. That memo was a bucket of ice water. We all knew what it meant. Arthur came by my desk later that day. He didn't say much, just looked at me, shook his head, and said something about how spreadsheets don't lie, but HR sure as hell tries. The day of the layoffs was surreal. It was a Tuesday or a Wednesday, I think. The sky was gray. The office was dead silent. Nobody was talking. You could just hear the clicking of keyboards. Then the calendar invites started appearing. Meeting with HR, 15-minute slots. The first person to get one on our floor was Flynn. He saw the pop-up on his screen and just froze. His face went completely pale. He looked at me, his eyes wide with panic. I tried to give him a reassuring nod, but what could I say? He walked toward the HR offices like a man walking to the gallows. 15 minutes later, he came back carrying a cardboard box. One of the HR drones was with him, making sure he didn't take anything he wasn't supposed to. He didn't even look at us. Just packed his desk, his hands shaking. His little collection of Funko Pops, a picture of his dog, his favorite coffee mug. He was out the door in 5 minutes, gone. A kid who worked 10-hour days, always eager to learn, just erased. An hour later, my calendar pinged. Meeting with HR. My stomach dropped. I'd been at this company for my entire professional life. I'd built entire systems from the ground up. I closed my laptop, stood up, and made the same walk Flynn did. Eleanor's office was all glass and minimalist furniture. She was sitting behind a large white desk, a laptop open in front of her. She had this practiced, sympathetic look on her face. She motioned for me to sit down. She started with the usual script. As you know, the company is going through a period of transition. I just tuned it out. I knew where this was going. And your position has been identified as redundant. There it was. I didn't say anything for a moment, just stared at her. Then I found my voice. I asked her why. I told her my performance reviews have been stellar for 9 years straight, that I just closed out a project that saved the company millions, that I was mentoring 3 junior engineers. I wasn't angry, I was just confused. It didn't make any logical sense. She folded her hands on her desk and gave me a little sigh. The look she gave me wasn't one of a boss letting an employee go. It was the look of a teacher explaining a simple concept to a child who just isn't getting it. She told me this wasn't about performance. She said it was about looking at the bigger picture. That my role and roles like mine have been historically overrepresented by my demographic, and that for the company to achieve true equity, sacrifices had to be made by those who have benefited from the existing power structures. She literally said that. She said I should see this as an opportunity for me to reflect on my privilege. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't a layoff. This was an ideological purge. I was being fired because of who I was, not what I did. All my years of hard work, my loyalty, my expertise, it meant nothing. I was just a statistic on her equity spreadsheet. I didn't argue. I knew it was pointless. Her mind was made up. I just stood up, said, "Okay," and walked out. Another HR drone handed me my box and followed me back to my desk. The walk of shame. Everyone trying not to look at you. I packed my things, my keyboard, my mouse, the little stress ball I'd had for years. As I was leaving, I saw Arthur. He caught my eye and just gave a slow, grim nod. He knew. I found out later that afternoon that Arthur got the call an hour after me. He told me about it when a bunch of us met up later. He walked into Eleanor's office, sat down, and she started her script. He cut her off mid-sentence. He apparently just said, "Save it. I know why I'm here. You're firing all the competent men because you think it'll look good in a press release." She was taken aback, tried to deny it, started talking about holistic reviews. He just laughed at her. As he was leaving, he stopped at the door, turned around, and looked her dead in the eye. He told her, "This isn't over. You've made a very, very big mistake. See you in court." She apparently scoffed and said something about threats born of toxic masculinity. He just smiled and walked away. That night, about a dozen of us who got the axe met at a dive bar near the office. The mood was bleak. Guys were in shock. Some were just staring into their beers. Flynn was in a corner, white-knuckling a glass of water. He looked like he was about to be sick. He told us he just bought a condo, his first home. We started comparing notes. Out of the 30 people laid off in the engineering and project management divisions, 28 were men. The 2 women who were let go were both nearing retirement anyway. Meanwhile, we all knew who was kept on. A female junior developer who had been on a performance improvement plan for 6 months, she stayed. A guy hired through a diversity initiative who spent most of his day on his phone and had contributed nothing to any project, he stayed. The pattern was undeniable. It was a targeted culling. We were all feeling pretty hopeless. What could we do? The company had all the power. Then Arthur spoke up. He commanded the room. His voice was calm, but full of steel. He told us to stop feeling sorry for ourselves. He explained that what Eleonora and the company did wasn't just unethical or stupid. It was illegal. Blatantly, flagrantly illegal. He said this wasn't about feelings. This was about facts and evidence. He laid out a plan. We needed to document everything. Every performance review, every email from a boss praising our work, every project we ever completed. We needed to build a timeline. We needed to create a full list of everyone fired and everyone who stayed, along with their roles and, as best we could, their performance records. He said, "She thinks she's a revolutionary changing the world. She's just a zealot who broke the law, and we're going to hold her and this company accountable." For the first time that day, I felt a spark of something other than despair. It was a cold, hard anger, a sense of purpose. Arthur was right. This wasn't over. A sense of camaraderie started to build in that crappy bar. We were a bunch of guys who had been cast aside, told we were worthless because of our privilege. We were isolated, betrayed, and humiliated. But now, we weren't alone. We had each other. We spent the next 2 hours huddled around planning. Laptops came out. We started a shared document. People were pulling up old emails on their phones, taking screenshots of performance metrics they still had access to. Flynn, who had been silent and broken, suddenly perked up. He was a data guy. He started organizing everything into a massive spreadsheet. The names, the dates, the job titles, the departmental demographics before and after the layoffs. The numbers were damning. The engineering department went from 70% male to nearly 50-50 in a single afternoon. All of the top-performing male leads were gone. All of them. It was a statistical impossibility for this to be random or based on performance. It was a purge, and we had the proof. By the end of the night, we had a plan. We would pool our money. We would find the most ruthless employment lawyer in the city. We would file a class action lawsuit for wrongful termination and gender discrimination. We weren't just going to ask for our jobs back. We were going to make them pay for what they did. We were going to make sure Eleanor's grand social experiment blew up in her face. Walking out of that bar, the night air felt different. I was still unemployed. I was still facing an uncertain future. But I was no longer a victim. I was part of a team again. And we had a mission. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. We found a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense guy in his 60s who had been suing corporations for 40 years. We all met him in his stuffy, book-lined office. We laid out our case. We showed him the spreadsheet Flynn had created. The lawyer listened intently, not saying a word, just occasionally nodding. When we finished, he leaned back in his chair and a slow grin spread across his face. He looked at us and said, "Gentlemen, in my 40 years of practice, I have rarely seen a case this beautifully obvious." He told us the company's HR department had handed us a multi-million-dollar win on a silver platter. Their arrogance, he explained, was their undoing. They were so convinced of their own moral righteousness that they didn't even bother to hide what they were doing. He agreed to take the case on contingency. He knew it was a slam dunk. The work was just beginning. We had to give depositions, collect more evidence, and prepare for a long fight. It was tough. My savings started to dwindle. I started looking for another job, but it was hard to explain why a top engineer was suddenly on the market. The official story from Innovatech was that my position was eliminated due to restructuring. But the tech world is small. Rumors travel. Some recruiters seemed hesitant, as if I was damaged goods. It was a demoralizing time. Some of the guys in our group started to lose hope, but Arthur kept us all together. He organized weekly calls. He kept us focused. He was our rock. He reminded us of what was at stake. It wasn't just about the money. It was about standing up to a system that had decided we were disposable. It was about fighting for the simple idea that people should be judged by the content of their character and the quality of their work, not by their gender. We were fighting for fairness itself, and that was a cause worth fighting for. The lawsuit was officially filed. A legal notice, thick as a phone book, was delivered to Innovatech's corporate headquarters. The initial reaction from the company was exactly what we expected. Publicly, they released a short, sterile statement about not commenting on pending litigation. Internally, however, Eleonora went on the offensive. I heard about it from a couple of old contacts who were still inside, people who were quietly rooting for us. She held a company-wide town hall meeting, stood up on the same stage where she denounced her grand vision. She framed our lawsuit as a desperate, pathetic attack from a group of disgruntled former employees who couldn't handle progress. She told everyone it was a frivolous suit, an attempt to intimidate the company and halt its important work in creating an equitable environment. She spoke of vested interests and resistance to change. She was basically painting us as villains in her corporate superhero story. She was the hero fighting for justice, and we were the angry mob trying to protect our privilege. She ended her speech by telling everyone to stay the course and not be distracted by the noise. For a little while, it seemed to work. The people who already believed in her ideology nodded along. The rest were too scared for their own jobs to say anything. Eleonora was at the peak of her power. She felt untouchable, morally and professionally. That was her first mistake. Her second was underestimating our lawyer. The legal process lumbered forward. The first major phase was discovery. This is where both sides have to show their cards. We had to turn over our emails, texts, everything. And they had to do the same. Our lawyer was like a shark that smelled blood in the water. He sent Innovatech a discovery request that was hundreds of pages long. He demanded every email Eleonora had ever sent or received that mentioned the words layoff, restructuring, diversity, equity, gender, or demographics. He requested all meeting minutes from the leadership team where the layoffs were discussed. He wanted performance reviews, salary data, hiring records for the last 5 years. Most importantly, he demanded the exact methodology and data used to decide who would be fired. The company's lawyers tried to fight it, of course. They claimed it was overly broad, a fishing expedition. But the judge took one look at our initial evidence, Flynn's spreadsheet, and granted almost everything. A few weeks later, the documents started to arrive. It was a digital tidal wave, thousands upon thousands of emails, chat logs, and internal documents. Our lawyer hired a team of paralegals to sift through it all, and he had us help, looking for anything that stood out. It didn't take long to find the smoking gun. In fact, there were dozens of them. Eleonora hadn't just been careless, she had been proud. We found the original PowerPoint presentation she had given to the CEO and the board. One slide had a chart titled Rebalancing Our Workforce. It literally showed the targeted percentage decrease for male employees in the engineering department. There was an email chain between Eleonora and her new director of equity and belonging. In it, they discussed how to frame the layoffs to avoid legal trouble. The director of equity warned her that targeting one gender was illegal. Eleonora's reply was pure hubris. She wrote, "The law was written to protect the marginalized, not to uphold existing structures of power. We are on the right side of history here. It's a moral imperative." She thought her good intentions made her immune to the law. The absolute gold mine was a spreadsheet file named Equity Restructuring Matrix _final.xlsx. It was her masterpiece. Every employee in the company was on it. There were columns for name, role, salary, and performance score. But there were other columns too: gender, ethnicity, age. And then there was the final column, the one that decided our fate. It was labeled Equity Priority Score. It was a formula. It took your performance score and literally subtracted points based on your privilege. Being male was a negative modifier. Being white or Asian was another negative modifier. Being a woman or a minority was a positive modifier. A high-performing male engineer could have a lower equity priority score than a low-performing female marketing intern. It was all there in black and white. A mathematical formula for discrimination. Flynn, looking at the spreadsheet, just let out a low whistle. He said a first-year data science student would know better than to create something so obviously incriminated. When our lawyer saw that file, he just started laughing. A deep, hearty laugh. He called us into his office and put the spreadsheet up on a big monitor. He pointed at the screen and said, This is the kind of evidence lawyers dream about. She not only committed the crime, she kept a detailed diary explaining how and why she did it." He told us the case was no longer about winning. It was about deciding how many zeros would be on the settlement check. Meanwhile, inside Innovate Tech, the consequences of the layoffs were starting to hit. The projects Emmett and Arthur had been leading were now rudderless. Deadlines were being missed. Major clients were getting angry. The less experienced people who were kept on couldn't handle the workload. The whole engineering department was in a state of quiet chaos. Productivity plummeted. Morale was in the toilet. The remaining male employees were terrified. They kept their heads down, did the bare minimum, and polished their resumes at night. The company was starting to bleed talent, money, and its reputation. The board of directors, who had initially approved Eleonora's plan in a haze of corporate virtue signaling, were starting to get nervous. Their own lawyers finally got through to them. They presented the same evidence we had, the emails, the spreadsheet. They explained the catastrophic legal exposure. They weren't talking about a small settlement. They were talking about a massive, headline-making verdict that could permanently damage the company. The board's vague, feel-good support for equity evaporated the instant it collided with the cold, hard reality of a 9-figure liability. They called an emergency board meeting. Eleonora was summoned. I got the whole story later from a source inside the C-suite. It was brutal. She walked into the boardroom with her usual air of supreme confidence. She probably thought they were going to praise her for her bold leadership. She had a presentation ready on her tablet about the long-term brand benefits of her strategy. She never even got to turn it on. The chairman of the board, a quiet, ruthless old man who had built his fortune in manufacturing, didn't ask her to sit down. He was standing at the head of the table, looking at a stack of papers. He started speaking in a low, flat voice. He didn't talk about diversity or inclusion. He talked about numbers. He started with Arthur. He asked Eleonora if she knew who Arthur was. She said, of course, he was a senior project manager. The chairman informed her that Arthur was the only person who had a relationship with their biggest client, a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. And that client was now threatening to pull their contract because 3 major project deadlines had been missed since Arthur's departure. The potential loss was over $100 million. He then moved on to me, Emmett. He said, "You fired your lead security engineer, the man who designed our entire data protection architecture." He asked her if she had any idea how much it would cost to hire a replacement with my level of expertise, assuming they could even find one. He told her a rival firm had already started trying to poach our top developers, and morale was so low that they were listening. Eleonora started to stammer. She tried to pivot back to her talking points. She started talking about the importance of disrupting the status quo and building a workforce for the future. Another board member, the CFO, cut her off. He held up a single piece of paper. It was the projected legal fees and settlement cost for our lawsuit. He said, "Your workforce for the future is going to cost this company an estimated $50 million in legal damages. That's a low-end estimate." He asked her to point to the line item in her budget that accounted for that. She was visibly faltering now. Her confidence was cracking. She made one last, desperate attempt. She fell back on her ultimate defense. She told them the lawsuit was nothing more than the lashing out of toxic masculinity. She said this was the predictable backlash that all true progressives face when they challenge the patriarchy. She basically accused the board of being cowards if they backed down. The chairman of the board just stared at her. His expression didn't change. He let the silence hang in the air for a few long seconds. Then he said, "We are not a social justice organization, Eleonora. We are a publicly traded company with a fiduciary duty to our shareholders. You were hired to manage human resources. Instead, you have exposed this company to catastrophic financial and operational risk. You are not a visionary. You are a liability." He paused again, then delivered the final blow. "Your employment at Innovatech is terminated, effective immediately. Pack your personal belongings. Security will escort you from the building." She just stood there, completely stunned. Her was slightly open. The color drained from her face. In that moment, all the arrogance, all the self-righteousness was gone. All that was left was raw, unfiltered panic. She finally understood. The system she thought she commanded didn't care about her ideals. It only cared about profit and loss. And she was now firmly in the loss column. The story of her exit became a legend at the company. 2 large security guards met her at the boardroom door. They walked her back to her glass-walled office. The entire floor went silent, watching the drama unfold. She was given a single cardboard box. As she hurriedly packed her things, her corporate awards, her books on feminist theory, she looked out at the people she had saved, the women she had protected from layoffs, the diverse hires she had championed. Not one of them would meet her eye. They just stared at their screens, pretending to work. Nobody said a word of support. Nobody thanked her. To them, she wasn't a hero anymore. She was a failure, a pariah. And associating with her was a career risk. She had been betrayed by the very people she had sacrificed us for. In her moment of humiliation, she was completely and utterly alone. After she was gone, things at Innovatech moved fast. The company's lawyers called our lawyer the very next day. They didn't want to go to court. They didn't want any more publicity. They wanted to settle. Our lawyer negotiated hard. The final settlement was enormous. It was enough for every single one of us to be more than just made whole. It was life-changing money for some of the guys, like Flynn. He could pay off his condo and have plenty left over. The company also had to issue a formal public apology, though it was written in vague corporate speak that didn't admit guilt directly. But we didn't care. We had won. The victory was sweet, but what came next was even better. Arthur and I took our share of the settlement and decided to start our own business, a small, specialized IT consulting firm. We hired a few of the other guys who were laid off with us. Our business model was simple. We had one core value: competence. We didn't care about anyone's demographics. We cared if they could do the job. Our reputation preceded us because we were the guys Innovatech had stupidly fired. Clients knew we were good. Our first big client, it was the multi-billion-dollar conglomerate that was about to leave Innovatech. Arthur called his old contact there, and they signed with us within a week. We started poaching Innovatech's best talent. The people who were left behind in the wreckage, who were sick of the ideological nonsense. Within a year, our little company was thriving. We were doing the work we loved with people we respected. We had built our own table instead of begging for a seat at theirs. As for Eleonora, her fate was the perfect punchline to the whole sorry joke. Her name was radioactive. The story of the Innovatech lawsuit and her equity restructuring matrix had spread through the HR and tech communities. No sane company would touch her. I looked her up on LinkedIn once, maybe 6 or 8 months after she was fired. Her profile was a monument to self-delusion. Her headline was Transformational HR Leader, Staunch Champion of Equity, Shaw We Building Inclusive Cultures. She was trying to rebrand herself as a freelance consultant, but her posts had zero engagement, just a sad void. The last I heard, she was giving a free webinar on YouTube about surviving corporate misogyny. It had 17 viewers. She, who had judged and dismissed us based on our immutable characteristics, was now being judged by the consequences of her own actions. She wanted to dismantle what she saw as an unfair system. In the end, the only career she dismantled was her own. She had wielded equity as a weapon, and it had backfired spectacularly, leaving her with nothing. And us? We were doing just fine. We learned a hard lesson. In a world that's gone crazy, sometimes the best thing you can do is build your own little corner of sanity based on merit and mutual respect. It turns out that's a pretty good business model.